We're spending our day in the 19th century. A big explosion of missionary activity. Of course, there had been missionary activity from the time of Pentecost, and we're going to look at some of the background. But things really took off in the 19th century, especially England and in the United States. So we're going to look at that today, the modern missionary movement. So where do we start? Well, of course, we start with the Great Commission. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." There was a line of thought that that was directed only to the apostles. And when we get to William Carey, the man called the father of modern missions, he preached, no, that was not just for the apostles. That is an ongoing command. And that really made a difference in terms of the expansion of the missionary movement. Everybody except Mark has some version of this. I like John especially. On that first Easter night, when the apostles were in the locked room and were scaredy cats, he comes to them quite miraculously. They are astonished. He wishes them peace. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you." And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit." If I'm hiding in a locked room for fear that the Jews will crucify me as they have crucified my master, I do not want to hear the message, "I am sending you as the Father sent me." Well, that didn't work out too well, Jesus. So what does he do immediately? Don't miss, he breathes on them, the Holy Spirit. We often think of that has to wait until Pentecost. This, at least for the ones in that room, was a preview, was an earlier baptism in the Spirit. So, if he's going to send them, he knows they're going to need help, and he breathes the Holy Spirit on them. In Luke, we don't get to the book of Acts until we get his version of the Great Commission. In Acts 1:8, again, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth." So there is again a commissioning to be his witnesses to the end of the earth. Let's take a look at, and I apologize, I did a lot of research, and there were like thousands of listings of missionary activity for the first 1,800 years of the church. And so if I've left out your favorite, just be happy that we're not here the rest of the day. So I've hit the highlight, what I think are the highlights. I have some personal attachment to some of these. I'm not that old where I was there when Paul went to Asia Minor and Europe. But there we have his 3 missionary journeys over about those 10 years. Then we are quite confident Thomas went to India. There is, and the one reason we think that is there to this day is a church of Thomas Christians. In the top picture we have Thomas baptizing in India. And similarly, Mark, we believe, goes to Egypt. That is the Coptic Orthodox Cathedral in which his relics are contained, which again may or may not be his bones and such, but a good tradition that Thomas goes as far as India and Mark goes down to Egypt. Then in the early Middle Ages, you've been to Paris, I presume, some of you. You know the district Saint-Denis. Saint Denis is the patron saint of France. I always thought it was Joan of Arc, but it is Denis, and 6 other apostles to the Gauls, which would be at this time France, sent by Rome to establish a church in Paris. And I had to put this up here because it was a word that I'd never encountered before. And I had to put I was just going to leave it as a cephalophore and have somebody out there go, what the heck is that? But I decided it was probably best to put up a little description. It's a head carrier. The story is that Dennis had his head chopped off for his Christian activities, and that he then appeared carrying it around town. So, if anybody asks you who was the most famous Christian, and there are others apparently, cephalophores, you can tell it was Saint Denis or Dennis. This one I like a lot too because I'd read about the Portuguese missions into Ethiopia, or actually it was sort of military and religious, into Ethiopia. And there'd been a church there for a long, long time. A fellow named Frumentius was taken as a slave down to the kingdom of Axum, which is in Ethiopia today. He preached the gospel, and eventually the king of Axum made Christianity the official religion. So this is going on in the 4th century. And then this is a personal favorite. Bishop Ulfilas, or Wulfila, depending on which book you read, translated the Bible into Gothic. Good old Bishop Ulfilas because to the barbarians, the Goths, I mean, there are a lot of them, and that's who needed the gospel, he believed. And this, as far as we know, was the first translation developed specifically for missionary purposes. You had the Greek translation of the Old Testament in about 250 BC, the Septuagint, because people were no longer did not know their Hebrew as well down in Alexandria, Egypt, after a couple hundred years of being gone. And so that was for utilitarian purposes, as was the Vulgate, and the translation into Latin in about 400 AD, that had become the common language. This was a translation for the purpose of evangelizing, or at least sharing the good news with the Goths. And the reason this is happy for me, first up the top is one of the churches in Lulabella in Axum, Ethiopia. You will notice what about that church? It's below ground. Yeah, it was carved out of the rock into the ground. And there are several of them. I'd love to go there. Not sure how I get there, but and the bottom is the Silver Bible. When Ulfilas translated it, he did the whole Bible, but the only surviving Gothic manuscript that we have is of the 4 Gospels, and they are contained in this silver-cased Bible in the University Library in Uppsala, Sweden, which we stumbled across one day, and then a few years later had the privilege of marrying, or at least officiating the marriage of, a young lady from Uppsala to my law school roommate's son. So we have been to Uppsala twice. But I think that's pretty cool. So if you're ever in Uppsala, and it is the most valuable manuscript document that the Swedes have. Okay, now here's some more familiar territory to you. The early Middle Ages, we have our friend Patrick, who is taken away as a slave, but he comes after a raid, and he returns to Ireland after having escaped from the French marauders Irish marauders, after he's been there captive for 6 years. So there's St. Patrick up on the top. He comes to Ireland. I think they don't have snakes that he needed to worry about, but he did have pagans that he needed to worry about, and he did. A story that I think is probably not true, but reminds us that when we have newcomers to the church, there are things that we do that people may not understand, and they probably ought to be explained. Our boy Patrick, it is said, had his crozier, which you see in his left hand, and at the baptism of the king, he errantly put it on the king's foot. And it really hurt. And everybody thought that was part of the deal, that you stabbed somebody in the foot as part of the baptism. So I don't know if that's true, but it is a good reminder of some of the things that look strange to people, and we need to be conscious of that. Then, as good Presbyterians, with stones from the island of Iona sitting right out in front of our narthex, we know about Columba, sailed from Ireland to Scotland and founded an evangelistic training center on the island of Iona, which you see down there at the bottom, where they trained missionaries. And in the late 6th century, England had Christian past, but it had been overrun and not much left of it. So Pope Gregory the Great sends a team, this is not St. Augustine, it's another Augustine, of missionaries to Canterbury, and about, we're told, 10,000 people were baptized in a year in England. So lots of things going on. Another landmarks, you know Francis of Assisi for a lot of things. You may not have known that he tagged along not to participate in the Fifth Crusade, but so that he could present the gospel to the Sultan, which he did. And this marks a little bit of a shift. Iona was an abbey, like a monastery where missionaries were being sent out. We now have the Catholic orders of the Franciscans and the Dominicans sort of leading the charge in terms of missions. This is, we think so much of China today and think, gosh, it hadn't been long since we've been evangelizing in China. Well, in Marco Polo's day, we did. And Marco Polo's uncles get the task of taking a message from Kublai Khan back to the Pope, said, we would like 100 Christian missionaries. And it wasn't that Kublai Khan was necessarily converted, but he was interested in understanding all this and wanted his people to understand this. Well, 20 years later, the Pope gets around to sending 2, one of whom died on the way. And then the other, John of Montecorvino, did eventually get there, worked for 11 years, and baptized, we are told, more than 6,000 Chinese. Now, moving forward, Francis Xavier, you have probably heard of him. He has a pretty good basketball team. He is the most famous of all Roman Catholic missionaries. He was a Jesuit. That was an order founded after the Franciscans and the Dominicans. And he arrives in the Portuguese colony in India of Goa and then goes to South India, and this is his legacy. He arrived to find an untutored mob, and he left behind a church in being. So he established a church in India. In 1549, Jesuit missionaries, which included Xavier, he was a busy man, go to Japan. And I think I've mentioned before, someday I want to teach a class and tell that story of how they got there in about 50 years, had a lot of success, and then they got banned. And then they got tortured if they stayed. And Japan was without missionaries, or at least, for a couple hundred years. And yet the people that the earliest missionaries, starting with Xavier, had taught, carried on the Christian tradition. And so when Commodore Perry sails into Tokyo Bay and the relations with Japan, which is a very insular place, open up again, missionaries go to a church in Nagasaki, and this group of people wanders in and says, "Our heart is where your heart is." They had been practicing Christianity quietly. They were called the hidden Christians of Japan for a couple hundred years. And we don't really have time to go into it today, but they had their own scripture. They didn't have Bibles. Those were all burned or chased out of the country. And I have a translation of what was their Holy Scriptures, which is a really strange amalgam of Old Testament and New Testament stories and wild mythology, and it's very interesting. But that's what they had been working off of, so they had developed quite differently than Orthodox Christianity, but they were Christians. When the Catholics came back, they said, "Okay, fine, let's all be part of the Catholic Church." They said, "No, we kind of like what we're doing." So anyway, and then another amazing guy, I don't know if you know Matthew Ricci, he goes to China. He translates the Catholic catechisms into China. He was a mathematician, really brilliant man. So that's Matteo Ricci on the right and Francis Xavier on the left. How about America? This is another personal choice because we just were in Sault Ste. Marie, which is where the earliest French missions were in our country, up in northern Michigan. The French Jesuit Jacques Marquette, he has a pretty good basketball team too. And so that's in the late 17th century. And then you all know what we know, right? The early 18th century, we get the Franciscans from Spain establishing their missions here in Texas. And then last we have Junipero Serra, who establishes missions in California. So that's kind of what I called landmarks in early missions, because I didn't want people to come in and say, "Gosh, so nothing happened until the 19th century?" No, a lot did, but not on the scale that we're going to talk about. So, kaboom, it starts in England. This is outside of the Catholic orders. It is, these are Protestant missions now. In 1792, the Baptist Missionary Society was formed. I like that as opposed to the original name, the Particular Society for the Propagation of the Gospel Amongst the Heathen. It was the first society, and that's the difference we're going to see as we're coming in to the 19th century. It's no longer monasteries sending people out. It's no longer specific orders of Catholic priests. It's societies made up of all kinds of people. And so, as my Christian history issue number 9 tells me, this marked the beginning of the greatest expansion witnessed by the church since apostolic times. That's a pretty bold statement. Followed shortly thereafter, the London Missionary Society is formed. It has originally been interdenominational, but it later became identified with the congregational churches. They sent out 475 missionaries in the 50 years between 1795 and 1845, including one named David Livingstone, I presume, who, as I recall, Al, you probably converted like nobody.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, he went O for Africa. But he was there, and he tried. Then, and this is something that will give us a clue as to why all this is happening now. In 1799, evangelicals of what was known as the Clapham sect for the particular part of town, they were known for advocating social reform, especially abolition of the slave trade. And you probably know the name William Wilberforce, who fought to his death to end the slave trade in Great Britain, ultimately was successful. And they formed a church missionary society for Africa and the East. And so what's happening here is you have a high level of social consciousness, of concern for people and their welfare. And I think along with that, a concern for people of foreign lands who do not know the gospel. So these social reformers and the missionary movement are going hand in hand. Then in 1813, we have the Leeds district in London. Their Methodists established a missionary society, which ultimately led to the Wesleyan Missionary Society in 1818. So this is the big kickoff, if you will, in the UK. And here is our first pioneer of the modern missionary movement. William Carey lived from, 1761 to 1834. He was a cobbler. He also did some preaching, he was a pastor, but cobbling is how he made his living, and he was not educated formally. We will see he is known as the father of modern missions, so that's why we start with him. And this is from Stephen Neal. If you want to read a thorough and the sort of landmark in the history of missions, it's Stephen Neal's book, A History of Christian Missions. I ordered that just so that I could teach today. It is said that Carey's work represents a turning point, which I thought was nice that that's what we'd called the class. And here, this famous Christian historian is using the same phraseology. It marks the entry of the English-speaking world on a large scale into the missionary enterprise. And it has been the English-speaking world that has provided 4/5 of the non-Roman missionaries from the days of Carey until the present time. He wrote what is known also as the Magna Carta, the sort of founding document of the Protestant mission movement. Again, the title is a product of its times, an inquiry into the obligations of Christians to use means for the conversion of the heathens. And it's quite extensive, even though he did not have any high school, or I'm thinking I'm remembering right. He translated the Bible into 6 languages. Yeah, never attended high school or college.
What are the letters behind his name?
Where? Oh, I don't know, because he wasn't Brown University gave him an honorary doctorate. Yeah. Yeah, they gave him an honorary doctorate.
Doctorate of Divinity?
Yeah, in 1807. Yeah, I don't know what, it just said he got a degree, an honorary degree from there. So anyway, but he wouldn't have had that in 1792, so I'm not sure why he gets a DD. He may have been a dentist. No, he wasn't a dentist. But, given his lack of formal education, that he translates the Bible into 6 languages and comes up with the first edition of the New Testament in the Bengali language is pretty impressive. And in fact, we're going to see that the mark that he leaves on Christian missions is not so much the converts as just the other things that he did. So there he is teaching someone from India. He preaches a sermon back in England in 1792 where he laid down 2 great principles. Said, expect great things from God, attempt great things for God. And he had also, as I mentioned earlier, said, the Great Commission is binding on us today. It was not just something that were given to those original disciples. 4 months after he preaches this sermon, the Baptist Missionary Society was formed, and he and his family are the first missionaries sent out by that society. He lived and worked in India, and this is why he's so well regarded, for 41 years. And I read something that said most of them lasted 6 months, that the heat was oppressive, the illnesses were oppressive, and he was there for 41 years. Didn't have any converts in his first 6 years. By 1821, had only 700. But as I noted earlier, his legacy is not primarily in evangelism, but his perseverance. He kept at it. His stamina, he managed not to die on us. And he spent more time on translation work and administration. He established missions and schools.
So, Chris, these languages, are they all Indian type languages?
No, and I can't remember what they all were, but no, they were not all of India. And here is another, actually this is well recognized. Anybody heard of the haystack prayer meeting? Okay, well I've heard of it because my daughter went to college, our older daughter went to college right where this is. It's a great story, and it is noted by mission historians as the kickoff for the American mission explosion. So, in the summer of 1806, 5 students met in a grove of trees at Williams College in Massachusetts. It is in Williamstown in western Massachusetts on the border of Vermont and New York, because the mighty Ephraim Williams was a soldier who went off, and he had money, went off to fight in the French and Indian War in 1755 and said, if I don't come back, I want to leave my money to the establishment of a college in the western territory of Massachusetts. Had Harvard in the east, and things had expanded. He said, the problem was it wasn't until the 1780s, 90s that the western territory of Massachusetts was defined as to whether it was going to be New York, Vermont, or Massachusetts. And when that finally got settled, the other condition he had was that they renamed the town for him. So this college is in Williamstown, Massachusetts. And so they established the college in 1793. So these are some of the early graduates. They have gathered to pray for divine guidance and to discuss their religious faith and calling. During an afternoon rainstorm, they sought refuge under a haystack. Undeterred, they continued their prayer meeting and consecrated their lives. They decided to overseas missions. And this incident, as Christian History magazine reports, became a pivotal event in launching the foreign missionary movement of American Protestantism. So you have the memorial marker there at the top, and then you have the explanatory marker on this site in the shelter of a haystack during a summer storm in 1806. 5 Williams College students dedicated their lives to the service of the church around the globe. Out of their decision grew the American foreign mission movement. So what started in the haystack didn't stay in the haystack. Several of these students went on from Williams to Andover, also in Massachusetts, but more in the Boston area. They had to go east. Andover Theological Seminary, and created a formal organization that ultimately led to the establishment of the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, the ABCFM. 2 years later, 5 of them as missionaries, accompanied by the wives of 3 of them. My original slide said 5 of them accompanied by 3 wives, and I didn't know if that meant 15 wives. They all had 3, so I had to revise that. Accompanied by the wives of 3 of them, set sail for India. And this included our United States most famous couple of missionaries, Adoniram and Ann Judson. Adoniram was not in the haystack, but he is part of this movement. And there they are. There's the 5 of them being commissioned. Laying on of hands. We know about that, don't we? As another issue, Christian History magazine, I think it's up to 160 some issues. I've started getting them, and I still get them. It's quarterly. It's great stuff. They explain that over the next 2 decades, American evangelicals founded and staffed dozens of voluntary societies. So that is the direction this is going. It's not monasteries, it's not orders of monks. It is voluntary societies to promote not just missions, but I said it's all as generally connected to moral reform, education, which of course we're in the time of the Industrial Revolution. These are all domestic problems as well as problems overseas. Bible reading and prison reform. And I give you a couple of examples there, one of which is the American Bible Society, founded in 1816. And says Christian History magazine, the transformative model of the voluntary religious society or parachurch organization that emerged early in the 19th century remains a powerful shaping force even today, especially among American evangelicals. In fact, if you think of parachurch, they're not people who parachute in. They're Christian ministries that are not associated with a particular church, the parachurch ministries. Think of them. I serve and have served with Prison Fellowship, Bill Glass Behind the Walls Prison Ministry, the God of Hope Prison Ministry, Samaritan's Purse with Franklin Graham. They aren't just raising money, they're sending people out. And so that is a major development coming out of this time, is these ministries associated with the larger church, but not any particular church, that usually involve people from various denominations. So here's our friends Adoniram and Ann Judson. You will notice that there is not a lack of reference to women in this, and it's not because I scoured the archives to say, well, we got to get some women in here. They were an integral part of what was being done. If nothing else, they were suffering as the wives of these guys that went to India and China, but almost always they were doing more than that. And Ann Judson is a great example. So they sailed for India in 1812 as missionaries from the ABCFM that had been founded coming out of the Haystack Prayer Meeting. They had been inspired by William Carey, who we mentioned earlier. In fact, they were baptized when they got where they were going by his colleague. They were threatened with deportation in India. As you know, the British were in India, and the Indians didn't always care for the British, and so they sometimes got thrown out. And they got thrown out, so they go to Burma, which is where they really make a name for themselves, though that, of course, is not what they set out to do. And here, listen to what poor Ann Judson's story. Over time, Ann Judson suffered from smallpox, and she's not alone, and spinal meningitis, buried one child, and saw her husband shut up in a vermin-infested prison for 2 years. She is visiting him there in that picture on the right, famous picture. She also translated, and this is what I was saying, it's not just suffering with your husband. She also translated the Gospel of Matthew into Burmese and strove to improve the lot of Burmese women who were considered little more than chattel. She and a new baby died soon after Adoniram was released from prison. But she made a special effort to go plead for his release. There you have that picture. Adoniram got a full translation of the Bible into Burmese done. Took him 2 decades, 20 years, and I love what he signs off with. Thanks be to God, I have knelt down before him with the last leaf in my hand, last page, and I have dedicated it to his glory. May he make his own inspired word, now complete in the Burman language, the grand instrument of filling all Burma with songs of praise to our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. January 3rd, 1834. When he died, he left behind 7,000 members of the Burmese Christian church that he and Ann had founded. There is a copy of you can see it's English at the top and then Burmese, or what I assume is, at the bottom. This fellow is very well known. Hudson, again, if I left out anybody, if you have a favorite, you can tell us about it when we're done. We will have some time. Hudson Taylor, 1832 to 1905. He arrives in China in 1854. And this guy is the one that really needs to be credited with so much of what has made foreign missions effective to the extent they are. He popularized the ideas that missionaries should live and dress like people they sought to evangelize. Don't go over there looking like an English gentleman. But as you can see, he practices what he preached. Earlier Protestant missionaries, in addition to dressing up as proper English ladies and gentlemen, they were content to stay in the urban coastal areas where they landed. But he founded what has become famous as the China Inland Mission. It says we need to go into this vast country and get the work done. He founded that in 1865 on the premise that it would trust God to support its needs and never solicit funds from donors. And it never did. There is a map of the China Inland Mission. You can see in yellow the much farther inland areas. And when all this started, only about 90 Protestant missionaries were in China. He wanted to increase that by 25% in order to get to these inland provinces. He prayed for 24 willing, skillful laborers. Within a year, he got 16, but he already had some. He got 6 men and 10 women. Yay. They sailed from London to join the 4 men and a woman already there. So he's almost to his 24 that he wants. Again, as Christian History magazine reports, Taylor's boldness seemed to know no bounds. He was not content. When he got his 24, he wanted more. So what happens? By 1876, he's got 18 new ones on the way. By 1884, he's got 70 new ones on the way, and 102 more by 1887. And remember, these are going to be self-sustaining missionaries. He's not soliciting funds. The China Inland Mission became the largest missionary organization in China with a presence in all 18 provinces. Here are some of the distinctive features that Hudson Taylor put in place. The missionaries will be drawn from any denomination. If you are part of any parachurch activity, as I have been for a long time, they all have some very simple doctrinal statement. And he did. I don't know exactly what it required, but I'm guessing it looked like the Apostles' Creed. There would be no guaranteed salaries for missionaries. You had to trust in the Lord to supply your needs. You shared your income and you did not incur any debt. They would not appeal for funds, as I mentioned. The overseas work, and this is so important, would not be directed by home committees, people back in another world telling you what to do, but by Hudson Taylor and others on the spot. And that they would go into the interior of China where Christ has not been named. And as we started off with, they would wear Chinese clothes and worship in Chinese-styled buildings. This was not going to be a replica of Victorian England. His legacy, and I love it. I don't know if you can see in the background, but it is a picture of Hudson Taylor in the center down on the bottom with his Chinese friends around him. A young Chinese evangelist wrote when he heard of Taylor's death, "Dear and venerable pastor, we too are your little children. You opened for us the road to heaven. We do not want to bring you back, but we will follow you." Now, this is by special request. When I told Charlotte what I was doing today, she said, "You're going to talk about Lottie Moon, right?" I said, "Well, I guess so, if I have time." She said, "Well, she's the only one we ever learned about." And was it in real school, or I know you grew up Baptist, so you would have, yeah. She's big in the Baptist tradition. So there's old Lottie, or young Lottie. Hard to tell. She lived same time period as a lot of these people we're talking about, 1840 to 1912. Don't you love this? Hailed as the best man among missionaries in the Southern Baptist Missions Journal. So, And she went to China in 1873 as a missionary for the Southern Baptist Convention. She was told, what you can do is be a school teacher. But she thought that kind of limited what she believed to be her evangelistic gifts. And she writes, what women want who come to China is free opportunity to do the largest possible work. What women have a right to demand is perfect equality. Meaning she wanted to be a missionary like the guys. So at age 44, she begins a church in the town or province of Pingtu and reports something I had never seen before in China, such eagerness to learn, such spiritual desires. Surely there can be no deeper joy than that of saving souls. That was what she wanted to do. But there was a time of severe famine. She was suffering in ill health. She spent her last years trying to get the home crowd to fund her and feed her flock. She spent all of her money as little help came from over here, and she eventually died of poor health. But she too has a legacy. We'll look at that. Since 1918, and I don't know, they probably wouldn't like it if I said maybe they were feeling guilty about not helping poor old Lottie. I don't know. But since 1918, the Southern Baptists raised millions of dollars for missions through the annual Lottie Moon Christmas offering. It's a big deal. If you go to their website, it's what I was trying to do some research, and all I kept getting was requests to donate. And here, at least as I think this was 2022's picture, 203.7 million. And Lottie Moon was appointed as a missionary to China. Oh, this is from their website. So they give a little bit of her background. She spent nearly 40 years sharing the gospel with love, courage, and unwavering faith in China. Her letters home inspired churches to pray and give, maybe not that much, leading to the Lottie Moon Christmas offering for international missions. Today, this offering supports missionaries, helps take the life-transforming message of Jesus to the nations. If you go to the Baptist International Mission Board website, you can read all about it. All right, every good story deserves a beginning and an end, and as we saw, there was really no beginning to the missionary movement except, Pentecost and the Great Commission, the days of Jesus and the disciples. But we saw the beginning of the modern missionary movement in the UK with William Carey and in the United States with the Haystack Prayer Meeting. Here is our bookend on the other end. Missions haven't ended. But in 1910, there was a World Missionary Conference. William Carey, about 100 years before, when he was doing his work, had recommended that such a thing happen. Took a while. But there is a picture of the conference. And this represented the high tide of Western missionary expansion. So hence the end of our time today, which had gathered strength all throughout the 19th century. Yes, we did talk about that. In that century, when first Britain filled a vacuum of worldwide leadership, and then the United States emerged as a great economic power and shaper of civilization, the proportion of the world's population associated with Christian churches increased more rapidly than at any time since the 4th century. 4th century is when Constantine became emperor, and it was okay to be a Christian, and you didn't get killed for it. Where less than a quarter of the world could be identified as Christian in 1800, almost 35% could be so numbered at the time of the Edinburgh Conference. And this is from a book I've referred to earlier. You can waive the 4th edition. He has the new one. Turning Points, Mark Knowles, Decisive Moments in the History of Christianity. And Al and I, when we were preparing the course, I had listed this as the topic. He said, well, the 1910 Edinburgh World Edinburgh World Missionary Conference. Probably not when we call it what we want to call the class. So we called it the Modern Missionary Movement, which not ends, but this is kind of the high point. And here is their agenda, and there is their publication, the report carrying the gospel to all the non-Christian world. Lasted 10 days. Over 1,200 delegates from 150 missionary societies. Remember, that's where the trajectory was, into these societies and not formal orders of priests or even the denominations, but also churches. It was significant, this conference, because of its ecumenism, sort of. I wrote only Protestants attended. I found they were the only ones invited. Roman Catholics were not invited, which would explain it was not a Catholic protest. And here was their agenda. Number one, to transport the gospel to the whole non-Christian world. That the church had what the church's role in the mission field would be, the place of education in the Christian life. The message of Christian missions in relation to non-Christian faiths. How are we going to deal with people? It's not that they have no religion, it's they have a very different one than we do. Preparing missionaries, establishing home bases, how missions deal with governments, and then promotion of Christian unity. We're going to do this together. It's not going to be a contest. On that note, I have to recommend to you, if you are feeling in a missions mood this morning and you want to read a lovely novel, it is called The Keys of the Kingdom by A.J. Cronin. Have you read it? It's lovely. It is about a priest who is greatly disappointed that his bishop has chosen for a service in the UK as a big shot clergyman, his classmate, who is all fluff and pomp and circumstance, and he has been chosen to go to China. And he encounters there missionaries, I think Methodists, from other traditions, and there's a tension there, but it is a lovely story about how he wins eventually the people of his community to the Christian faith. And he starts off kind of in traditional ways. I won't give away too much of it. He does, because he has a little basic training in how diseases get spread and how to stop infections. Cures the village chieftain, who says, okay, I'm going to be a Christian now, because that was the way the missions had operated. We give you rice, they were called rice missionaries. We give you stuff, we do stuff for you. You become Christians. And he said, I don't want you coming in that way. Yeah.
Since we are on the topic of missionaries to China,
Yes.
Can I share with you my personal background?
Oh, I would love for you to do that. Let me, I got one more slide.
Okay.
Okay, and then, no, that would be great. That would be way great. But anyway, eventually the village chief comes to the Christian faith simply because he has watched this man work and live. So, all right. The Missionary Conference of 1910 represents a turning point. Yay, there we have it again. Not so much for what was done by its delegates as for symbolizing a dawning consciousness concerning the worldwide extension of the faith. The main difference in the 20th century is that earlier expansions of Christianity mostly involved single originating and single receiving cultures. So we've got a group over here that wants to go to India. We got a group here that wants to go to China, to Burma, wherever, Egypt. Now we have groups that want to go everywhere. Al made sure I put this in, how things have changed. According to the director for the Center of the Study of Global Christianity at Gordon Conwell, in 2010, that's the most recent numbers that he was relying on, the U.S. sent 1 out of every 4 missionaries, 127,000 of the world's estimated 400,000. In distant second place is Brazil. So we're sending 127,000. They're sending 34,000. But we also received the most missionaries with 32,400 in the year 2010. And so you can read the last line on there, but you can also think for yourselves, why is this? Why are we now why are we receiving more missionaries in this country than any other country? One, we have a lot of people here from many other countries who were not raised in the Christian tradition. That would be one. And as churches mature in places like Brazil, they're sending out missionaries. And they look at us and say, we think they need them. And you may know in the Anglican Church, there are several at least 30 former Episcopalian churches that are now members of the Diocese of Rwanda or some African nation, because the Anglican Church, of which they were part, the Episcopal Church in the United States, had very different views on interpretation of the Bible, particularly when it comes to gender and sexual orientation. So there are the countries, say Africa and South America, have a very conservative view of those things, and see that in the United States they believe we're going wrong. And so they're sending people here, but they're sending, I think, more likely, or more the majority of them, because there are people here from other countries. And as I said, we are an increasingly secularized society. Okay, good. Now let's hear a personal experience from China. Introduce yourself and then let her rip.
I'm Joseph Hang.
Hello,
So I joined the church about a year ago. For some of you that do not know, I am a product of American missionaries to China. So the Methodist Church sent a lot of missionaries to China in the late 1800s. And my father and mother were converted to Christianity in 1905. So my father was born in 1903 in China, in Nanking province. So the American missionaries were there, and somehow my father was converted to Christianity, and they were responsible for putting him in the seminary in 1922. So my father graduated from Nanking Theological Seminary.
Okay, so they're the
in
seminary.
1927.
Okay.
And somehow the church sent him to Singapore to pastor a church. So my father was a Methodist preacher, pastored this Hinghua Methodist. Now the Chinese have many dialects, as you probably know. So the Methodist movement is not only Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, everything in Singapore is very strong. So my father pastored the Hinghua Methodist Church in Singapore from 1927 to 67 for 40 years. So I was born in Singapore and grew up in the church. And I remember American missionaries teaching us Sunday school and doing, all the Bible studies, everything. So I grew up, with American missionaries.
Were they respectful of your local customs?
Very. In fact, I was so impressed. Several of them spoke our local dialect. So they came from China, and then when we were in Singapore, they came to Singapore. So I was born during the war, the Second World War, and I remember growing up with the American missionaries teaching us everything of the Bible, or every Sunday. Anyway, to finish my story, so I came to the U.S. again to study with the help of the Methodist Church. They arranged a scholarship for me to come to the U.S. to study. So that's where I am. So
We are glad
so
you're
I'm a
here.
proud product of the American missionaries to China.
Thank you. So, friends, it's not just numbers. It's individuals. Yeah. Yeah, Chris.
So I have a comment and then a question.
Yes,
And my comment is that there's St. Propitius in Gaza, which is considered the third or fourth oldest church in the world. And so I think they think that St. Mark's disciples or whatever, around the year 400 or whatever, passed through there on their way to Egypt.
On the way to Egypt,
Yeah.
okay.
And my question is, I grew up as a missionary kid, and I understood that there was a certain amount of competition between the different denominations.
There was.
Did you come across that at all?
Yeah. In fact, the novel I recommended to you, Keys of the Kingdom, sort of highlights that. Yeah, I mean, everybody wanted copies in the library. They wanted, people wanted more converts than the other guy. Plus, when you're talking about Protestants and Catholics, you're talking about, well, they're wrong. They're not teaching you this about the sacrament. They're teaching you this. So there was, in some sense, the same competition we always have theologically, but also, how are you going to score your points? How are you going to raise the money? You got to show converts. So yes, so that is. I didn't read as much about it in the 19th century. I think people were just getting going, but yeah, I know that is the case.
Well, you have, of course, the Greek Catholics who were converts from Greek Catholicism, from the
Orthodox
to Catholicism.
The good ones just try to bring the folks into the fold. They don't worry too much about which pen they're in. So, yeah. Any other thoughts, comments? Any favorite missionaries I left out? All right, I will consider my job done. Al, tell them what you're doing next week. If you know, no, I'm kidding.
So next week we are doing the modernist fundamentalist controversy of the late 19th, early 20th century. You probably know it better as the Scopes monkey trial, right? And this is a huge breaking point, and it's pretty much a North American phenomenon, not so much in Europe or global, but a real breaking point between mainline and fundamentalist churches. But it was a cultural phenomenon as well. So we're going to look into the whole modernist fundamentalist controversy of the late 19th, early 20th century next week. And then the final week when we get together, we're going to discuss one of the biggest turning points in church history right now. And it's called the Great De-Churching. And it's happening, you're a part of it. So you'll get a lot to participate in that one.